Hello, you're watching Dukascopy TV. Joining me in the studio today is Coast Sullenger, Managing Director of GAIA Capital. Coast, welcome into the studio again.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Today we're looking at the latest market movements over Ukraine and Russia, the crisis over there. But from what I can see, the markets, even now, haven't been reacting perhaps as a volatile way as we might have expected. Is that partly due to the fact that they're waiting for news on a possible bailout? Because I know that Ukraine is indebted to Russia, especially for its oil supply. Is it partly due to the fact that there's been no clear yes or no about Europe bailing them out at all?
Sure. I think the bailout will certainly help, but I think that what we have to consider is going into this crisis, the markets were just dead. I mean, they were very dead, they were very depressed, they had gone down quite a bit, along with other emerging markets, but particularly due to some local issues as well in Russia and Ukraine. So I think that everyone's just sold out, and I think that basically, even if there is a big event, such as a bailout package, I don't expect a big recovery on the equity side.
Because they've already sold.
I think it's going to take more time. It's going to take more time. There's a lot of other issues. I mean, this bailout is just one of many very important issues facing that region right now. But on the debt side, I think we could obviously see a big recovery because the debt has really sold off, especially in Ukraine, in quite a considerable way. So everyone on the debt side is just waiting for a bailout package.
Right. I mean, Russia's sent sent a letter to many European countries recently, including France, Germany, Turkey, and so on, saying, warning them about the oil supply going through Ukraine and telling them to be cautious. And this is most likely in relation to the sanctions being discussed on Russia. Are we seeing any movements in the commodities market?
Yeah, there's a lot of political posturing, and particularly around energy. Energy is a key factor in all of this, in this whole situation. I think that a continuing instability actually could lead to, loss of market share over time. Russia's market share could go down because European countries are going to start looking for more secure energy elsewhere. That's why I think Europe is also kind of on the sideline, because right now they're, compared to the United States, because they're very dependent on Russian oil and Russian energy, Russian gas. Particularly Russian gas. I mean, they're a practical monopoly in Eastern Europe, and there's something like 40–50% of many Western European countries, so it's unavoidable.
So it almost seems like both sides are bluffing. I mean, it almost seems like you've got Europe who are looking for other ways to power themselves. I mean, you've got the shale gas industry that's exploding in the US, and at the same time, Russia needs that money from Europe and from the US, and they need that for support. So really, is it one just standing up, horns to horns against each other, and no one really willing to back down?
This is pretty long term, because you just can't suddenly switch, from Russian gas to something else. I mean, you're gonna, if you decide to switch to some alternative form, you're gonna have to start building it out. It's gonna be, massive amounts of infrastructure development. But where there is obviously an opportunity for the United States, and maybe this is also part of their agenda, is that they're producing a lot of gas nowadays, and they need to find outlets for that gas. So if they can start building, eventually liquefied natural gas terminals in Europe to supply U.S. gas, that is an eventual alternative among others.
And some of those companies have already come over to Europe, especially to exploit the fracking, the shale gas reserves in parts of Europe, although that hasn't been working too well as of yet, as I understand.
No. In Europe, it's a different story. I think there's a lot more resistance. I mean, look, population density in Europe is such that there's a lot of local resistance. I mean, the fracking has, let's say, particular consequences that we can't even quantify today. Yeah. In the United States, a lot of the fracking is happening in very remote regions, but if you start doing that in Europe, and you start talking about polluting the water system and things like that, it's another question.
Now, Coast, you've got GAIA Capital have got an interest in agriculture and in food production. You have, I believe it's called your own Farming 20 Index and Tracker. Tell us briefly what this is, and how. And then after you've told us a little bit about what it is, just can you explain how the food production is surviving in Ukraine at the moment?
Yeah. Well, the GAIA Farming 20 Index and the Tracker Certificate, actually, which is run by a group called Leonteq out of Zurich, which is a leader in the Swiss, let's say, financial products industry. We're the advisor of the index. It's called the GAIA Farming 20, and what it is It's the first financial product, let's say index and financial product, which allows investors to, in one line, have a relatively, let's say, full exposure, pure play exposure to food production. And what the index does is it covers 20 of the largest food producing companies in the world. And those companies happen to be located, as you can well imagine, in emerging markets like Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, if we're talking about palm, Africa, and also in Ukraine. There's a couple of constituents in Ukraine as well.
Okay, we'll have a graph coming up about now for viewers at home. But tell us about the food production in Ukraine at the moment from your point of view.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly, because of the recent events, there's been a bit of a spook on the market about, let's say, shortfalls in production, and this is not. This is partially true because the Ukrainian agricultural sector is a big producer of main grains, of cereals, and given the instability over there and the fact that the banks are just not lending anymore, winter crops. There's no problem there, except that there might be some issues with ongoing capex to optimize those crops, but there's a big decline in spring crops, and so we could see a pretty significant decline in Ukrainian food production, which is going to contribute to the global supply and demand, and is one of the reasons probably that food prices have also spiked up over and above the droughts that we've seen in Brazil these past months.
And that's just another sort of issue for Ukraine to have to deal with, along with the situation going on over there with Russia as well.
Well, certainly, because agriculture is a pretty important part of the Ukrainian economy, but going forward in the future, it's a tremendous opportunity. I mean, Ukraine is a historical breadbasket of Europe and has the potential to be a massive food producer on the global scale. I mean, it could double its food production if it was to get the proper amount of financing and modernize its industry.
Because, Coast, just as we finish, because I know that you have a big investment in food production and food and tracking altogether, I just want to finish by asking you, what do you think the end game to all this will be in Ukraine? And could, again, this have a negative effect on food prices?
Yeah. Well, clearly, Russia is positioning itself to try to push Ukraine into a federalist state where regions have a significant amount of autonomy, and that would play into their hands because they would be able to exercise much more influence on the region, opposed to a very strong, nationalist government. So, what I think is really important for all sides actually is that the elections, which are planned in late May, that they happen in a way which is uncontestable, that they're fair elections, and that the current government doesn't start trying to implement, let's say, important measures before they gain legitimacy. And I think those elections are really going to be key for that.
And we're going to be watching them closely because the elections, everyone hopes, will go smoothly and peacefully. But as we've seen in Ukraine over the last year, anything could happen. Coast, thank you very much for coming into the studio today.
Pleasure.